All right. So here I am once again recording a couple of reminders about the second part of our culminating activity. And again, I'm going to note for you that this says 3 choices, 1 destination. That's 4 things in total, right? But you're making 3 individual choices at 3 parts, and then at the end, we're arriving at 1 destination. We've done the writing choices already, and today is about the reading choices. Well, yesterday, today, and Monday is about the reading choices. First thing, you do need to read both things because both things are kind of important to what you will do after. The things I want to remind you of what they are. 2 Years Less a Day is a short story. It is fiction by Dawn Dumont. Dawn Dumont herself is an Indigenous person. She is of Plains Cree descent, raised on the Okanese First Nation. So you're going to read her story, which is the longer of the 2 things you're going to read. Then you're also going to read a piece from Everyday Sociology about intersectionality. Now, I said yesterday a little bit about intersectionality. The article obviously has a lot more to say. I will say again, I always want to credit who an idea comes from. This idea comes from Kimberly Crenshaw, who teaches at Columbia Law School, and it's from quite a few years ago. But it's all about how different kinds of oppression intersect with each other. We've actually read a couple of things in this class which sort of connect to that idea of intersectionality. I'll remind you, for instance, of a poem that I read to you a good couple of months ago now called The Magic Wand. And it was written by a black man who was blind. And he talked about how when he took out his cane, one of those folding canes, how it acted like a magic wand, transforming him from one kind of stereotype in people's eyes to a different kind of stereotype. Right? At first they had the stereotype of him as a black man, then they had a stereotype of him as a blind man. Both were stereotypes. And so what he was talking about really was the intersection of disability with racial identity and how those 2 things intersected. So you're already kind of familiar with the concept of intersectionality. So you're going to read that too. Then we get to the point where you make a choice, because you're going to base your what you write and what you process on mostly on one of those 2 things. So I should start talking about that today. If you're writing about 2 Years Less a Day, the biggest question is Julie's oppression here intersectional? If so, how? What is the nature of her oppression? How is she being oppressed? Is she being oppressed as a person of her particular social class, of her racial identity, of her gender? How does that oppression work? And again, I said here you could do a little bit of research about the relationship between Indigenous people in Canada and the legal system in Canada. Out west, they have something they used to call the Starlight Tours. I can't remember what province this was, maybe in BC. This is horrible. This would involve police picking up an Indigenous person. Now, quite often it was an Indigenous person who was drunk, who was inebriated. There's nothing illegal about being drunk. It would involve police picking up that person and taking them on a Starlight tour. What that meant was the cops would take the person into their car, drive them far out of town, especially on cold winter nights, and leave them there. Some people died of the cold on their way back in. Some people lost fingers or toes to frostbite because of what the cops had done. There are real problematic relationships between law enforcement and Indigenous peoples in Canada. So you might want to read a little bit of that to talk about the oppression in this story. I also want to remind you, this is the reading part. You don't lose any marks for making a spelling mistake on it. I mean, check your spelling anyway, because I can take pride in your work. But you don't. I'm not marking the organization of your paragraphs. Sure, I said to write. I suggested to write in seek paragraphs, but I'm not marking that. What I'm marking is the insight in the reading that you do, and to show that, make sure you quote from the story. Right? Find some good quotations. You know, when she says this, or when this happens in the story. Like, come up with some very specific examples of things in the story to deepen your thinking, because that's what I'm marking. It's the reading for this part. Now, the other choice is to write about the concept of intersectionality itself. Right? If you don't want to write specifically about this story, then after reading the article about intersectionality, apply the ideas in that article to the world around you today. In your writing, definitely quote from the article as you write about it. If you feel like it, you can also refer to the short story. But choose at least 3 parts of the article to quote. Make sure you have some specific things to say about them. I gave you some helpful hints depending on which thing you're choosing, right? If you're choosing 2 years less a day, I said seek paragraphs again. I'm not marking the seek paragraph thing. It's just that's a good way to organize your thoughts. Try to begin with an answer to the question, as in, yes, the oppression here is intersectional, or no, the oppression here is not intersectional, and then go from there. Again, quote from the story, possibly quote from the article about intersectionality. Or on the other hand, if you are focusing on the article about intersectionality, the question is to apply the ideas in that article to the world around you. Again, I'm suggesting seek paragraphs. I'm not marking seek structure. Try to come up with some really specific examples from the world around you, right? If you are talking about intersectionality, then you're talking about various kinds of ways in which people are oppressed. Try to come up with some specific examples, things you've heard about, things you know about. You're allowed to do some light research into recent stories in the news. There's all kinds of interesting and troubling stories that have happened in the news about various kinds of people's oppression, which you could refer to there. And try to have one significant main idea that you're following, right? If somebody began, after reading the article, I can easily find examples of intersectional oppression in the world around me, that's a fairly simple idea, but that would lead to such complex and interesting example making. So that's how this one works. And I've been recording all this time. Oh, the last thing I want to say is, and save this until Monday. Last thing, don't let your words just sit all lonely by themselves on the page. Spruce it up. Because this isn't an essay you're writing, it's just basically a piece to show your understanding. I want you to be free to make it look kind of good. Put some pictures in there. Maybe if you find any images or anything that you think sort of adds to what you're saying, then by all means include those in there as well. As I said, when I introduced this one, it's a 3-day structure. Day 1 was reading yesterday. Day 2 is making your choice and doing your writing. Monday is really intended to get the finishing touches on that. I'm going to stop recording right now, but I have made a video now, which I will post so that you can refer to it at any time.